Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Win Home Inspection Podcast, your source for all things business ownership and home inspection. Today, I'm excited to bring you an episode from Jason Vernier, one of our Win Home inspectors. He's going to walk you through everything you need to know about a crawlspace inspection. One of my favorite lines, make sure there's no eyes looking back at you. Without further ado, here's Jason Vernier and how to inspect a crawlspace.
Hi, I'm Jason Vernier. I'm the owner and certified master inspector at Win Home Inspection, and I'm here to help you understand crawl spaces. That's right. The first thing we're going to talk about is the safety precautions and inherent dangers of a crawl space. A crawl space is built typically when an addition is put on or the soil is unstable, such as a sandy soil or a very wet soil. A crawl space will be built. You know this. We built the perimeter walls and we have an access in a hollow space. But imagine just taking a cup and putting it over the ground. There's some inherent dangers that can happen inside a crawl space. Critters, pests, snakes can enter the space. You need to be cautious of that. The ground or the posts and pillars may be unstable. If you ever feel unsafe, even though a crawl space meets the minimum requirements for access, whether it's through the floor, through the perimeter wall, or inside the space, don't enter if you don't feel safe. Ultimately, it's your call. If you don't feel you can fit or you can get back out, if you see standing water in the space, don't enter. Remember, electrical lines, Romex wiring, may be laying in that water and you could get electrocuted, so that's very dangerous. So be on the lookout for eyes looking back at you, right? You probably got critters, snakes, or other creatures inside the crawl space, and electricity. Those are inherent dangers, as well as soil stability and your pillars and posts. The next thing we want to focus on is getting access or getting inside the crawl space and determining if we even have a crawl space. Remember, some older homes have additions, and maybe that addition was built over a crawl space even though it had a basement or a slab previously. Sometimes it's cheaper just to put a crawl space in. Also, be on the lookout, like on this particular home, we have a full basement. However, if I look up here, I can see we definitely had an addition put on. You can see where the outside wall goes in and then comes out. The roof line is also different. So in this case, we know an addition was put on, and when I get into the basement wall ends. So I've got to have a crawl space. And in this case of this home, they removed the window, and the window now is the crawl space access. In most cases, your access is going to be on the outside perimeter of the home in a window well. There'll be a metal door. That door needs to fit tightly and snug, and it should be able to prevent pests from entering the space. A lot of times you'll see a board just thrown over the access or something like that, or a rock holding the door up. That's not sufficient. You want to keep pests out, and you want to keep moisture out as well. Be on the lookout as well to determine if your crawl space has ventilation, right? You should have cross ventilation to keep moisture levels down, and it may be hard to find it. Remember, all vegetation should be trimmed back from the home. And in this case, if I pull some of this ventilation back, I can easily see I do have a vent opening for my cross ventilation. So I know I have a crawl space on this home. Basically, they put an addition on and added a crawl space. Remember as well that your crawl space access may not be on the outside of the home. It may be hidden inside of a closet. It may be in a hallway, a kitchen, or a laundry. If you can't find the crawl space and you know there's one accessible, try asking the seller or the seller's agent. They may be able to point you in the right direction, or there may not be an access at all. I have run into that on an older late 1800s home where there was no crawl space access at all. And in that case, one needs to be provided, and you need to make that note. Remember that the crawl space is an area of your report that you have an outside and an inside section. When I look at my exterior siding, it's its own area in the report. My interior walls are their own area in the report. But my crawl space, we're going to be looking at the structure, perimeter, exterior, which is its own section, and we're going to have a crawl space section or a raised foundation section. They're all one. They all go together. So when I find a crack on the outside of the home, I may find that same crack on the inside if it goes through the stem wall. Okay, so it's important that you combine the two and don't forget where you are. How I approach it in my inspections is I will do the outside of the home first. I do the crawl space last. That way I can see if there's any leaks inside the home after I've run a whole bunch of water. I do the crawl space at the very last. I may have to pop out of that crawl space and come back outside to re-look at something that I saw previously in my inspection. I hope that makes sense to you. What we want to look for on this particular crawl space, it is block walls. Block walls is going to be your most common type of crawl space perimeter wall. You may have a double layer brick foundation as well. You're going to find that in about 1890 to the early 1930s. Then they went to cinder block walls. And in today's construction, you still may have cinder block walls, or you may have a concrete wall as well. Looking at this cinder block wall, we look like we're in pretty good shape. You can see some really minor cracks in the mortar. These aren't very serious, these minor cracks like this, but there's something we're going to want to note. That could easily be sealed up and prevents moisture and pests from entering the space. When I look at my foundation wall, I can see it's nice and even, nice and level. There hasn't been any shifting of the foundation or the outside wall. As I kind of make my way around, I can see we need to trim back a lot of vegetation, keep that back. You want to pay attention also to plumbing fixtures that come through. You may notice a hose bib like this, or you may notice a sump pump. You know, a pipe that comes out, maybe a 2 or 3 inch pipe that comes out of the house, and that's going to be for your sump pump. That should be 10 feet away from the foundation. Remember, when you have a crawl space, you want to limit as much moisture from getting into the crawl space as possible. Downspout extension should be utilized, and we need to get water well away from our foundation. These are areas to pay close attention to when you get inside the crawl space, wherever a hose bib goes through. There's a lot of times that water leaks and the seller may not even know it. So it could be leaking on the inside. So we want to pay close attention to these spots here, the hose bib or any plumbing penetrations or any penetration into the crawl space. Walking around, we're looking at, we can see we got a few more of those mortar cracks. It's just weakening mortar. Mortar deteriorates over time, but we don't have any major concerns there. But something you definitely want to annotate. Now, I hope you guys can see this. We do have an issue here. If you look really closely, right down here, and I hope the camera can see it, we can see that the block foundation has actually shifted. Okay, so my block wall is right here. This is where my footer goes, and the top piece has actually shifted, or the bottom piece has shifted inward. And in this case, that's what's happened. The bottom piece has shifted inward because this gutter used to discharge in this corner, and water would just pool and pool and pool. The soil gets soft, the foundation wall begins to shift. In this case, the homeowner stabilized the wall on the interior, so it's been fixed. I just happen to know this because it's my home, but you would definitely want to annotate this to ensure that this was taken care of by a qualified foundation specialist. Okay, now we're inside the home. We're about ready to get inside the crawl space. We need to protect ourselves, and we need to make sure the space is safe and make sure we have the right tools with us. Typically, the tool you're going to have is your camera, number one. You may need a tape measure as well as a non-contact voltmeter. You want to make sure there may be some wires that aren't hooked to anything. You want to make sure they're not active. Having those things, especially your PPE. Need your flashlight. An N95 mask at a minimum. Remember, there's good, better, and best. Could you wear a all cotton coverall into the crawl space? Sure. But you could also wear something as good as a Tyvek suit to go inside the crawl space. There's mold typically in crawl spaces, which we call microbial growth unless we test it, right? So we have mold issues, we have moisture issues, there's mud. You may want to change out your nice shoes that you used inside the home with your shoe covers and maybe wear boots inside the crawl space. So you also may need a tarp to put down where your ladder is if that's necessary to get in your crawl space. In this case, my crawl space access is inside, so I would put a tarp down for my ladder in case there's any debris or anything comes out of the crawl space. Now, like I talked about earlier, in this case, our crawl space access was actually where the window used to be, right? So our 18 by 24, it's there, but if you come across a crawl space and you don't feel safe about entering, don't enter the space. If it doesn't meet the minimum requirement and you still feel okay about entering it, then you're entering at your own risk. And there's some risks you should not take. in order to help out a client. Help out a client as much as humanly possible. Perhaps you could use something like a selfie stick. They even have robots or drone bots, the crawl bot that will go into a crawl space. So there are tools at your disposal, mirrors, things like that. If you can't enter the crawl space physically, that will help you determine what's in there. Just make sure you annotate everything in your report. So in this case, they've left us a nice little opening here. The first thing I'm going to do is take my flashlight and look inside to make sure it's safe and kind of survey the scene. Okay? It looks safe enough to get in there. I don't see any standing water. I don't see any eyes looking back at me. So I'm going to get geared up and I'm going to go inside. Okay, we've made our way into the crawl space. We have our PPE on. You could wear gloves. You could have shoe covers. There's other things you could do. You could cover your head as well. I definitely recommend wearing a hat or something or a spider web stick. Those are great to have in case you have spider webs. But taking a first survey of our crawl space, now that we're inside, we notice we have a vapor barrier. Every crawl space needs a vapor barrier, a minimum of 6 mil vapor barrier, and that prevents moisture from escaping into the space. Just like if you were to camp and you put a tarp down, you won't wake up with a wet butt the next day, right? Same thing. Every crawl space should have a vapor barrier. Also looking around, I notice I have unfaced insulation on the subfloor. Unfaced insulation is okay. If you see faced insulation, that is a paper or foil barrier on the subfloor, you're going to want to remove that. That typically will trap moisture or pests will burrow in between it, and it's not recommended. Even sometimes I will peel some of this back and look at the subfloor to make sure that there's no mold buildup or moisture didn't get trapped. What you do want to see, if you don't see insulation on the subfloor, that's okay. You definitely want to see insulation on your exterior walls. And on this case, we have polystyrene insulation. That is the standard now. The problem with it is it limits your inspection. Now you can't see the stem wall to see if there's any cracks or shifting of the foundation, okay? You don't want to peel that back. That's beyond the standard of practice, but you do want to note what you can and cannot see. The other thing to keep in mind about insulation is not all crawl spaces have to be insulated, okay? And you should have insulation on your outside walls. The floors don't absolutely have to be. If they're not insulated, however, then we want our ducting to be insulated. We don't want cold and hot air flowing through an uninsulated area, and then we would have moisture condensation build up. And that can cause all kinds of problems from mold and pests and things like that. Additionally, we want to look for pieces of insulation that have become detached or dislodged. Just like in an attic, we need the whole space insulated. If your crawl space is insulated, the entire space should be as well. Besides a vapor barrier and besides insulation, the biggest concerns you're going to have in a crawl space are going to be mold, pests, insects, and moisture damage. I'm going to show you one thing to look for that is kind of a legacy. You don't typically see it all the time, but if you do see it, it means the space has been treated for pests. If we look closely, we can see these 1-inch drill holes inside the exterior wall. Those are spaced perfectly apart. Those weren't by accident. That was termite treatment. They would drill these holes and insert a wand inside, inject a solution that literally poisons the soil to prevent insects. When you see that, typically you have termite damage or other insect damage, powder post beetles, carpenter ants or carpenter bee issues, and they've treated the space. In this case, there was no damage. It was a preventative treatment. We're looking at our walls, we're looking at our sill plate right here, and our joists. Sometimes you may see joist hangers instead of the joist sitting directly on the sill plate. You'll want to make note of that. And we want to make sure our vapor barrier goes all the way to the wall. The other thing to keep an eye on in your crawl space is none of your Romex should be laying on the ground. It all should be tied up and off of the ground. The reason for this is so no moisture can get into the Romex or you have some kind of electrical issue. I'm taking a look also at my polystyrene walls here that have been insulated. Sometimes you'll see claw marks, and that's an indication that we've had a critter in there, maybe a raccoon or a squirrel that's been trying to get in. You want to also look at your floor joists. Typically when there's a remodel event, they may have notched or cut a floor joist. And in this case, we're looking really good. Okay, this is a look at where that foundation block wall is shifted. You can see it is significant, right? We have the shifting there. And if we look at our sill plate, do you notice the gap? The sill plate's actually sitting off of the foundation wall. So that needs to be corrected, needs to be fixed. However, I'm going to show you, I wouldn't even have seen that with the polystyrene there. We wouldn't even have known it was an issue. So you have to document to protect yourself and also protect the purchaser, the buyer, so they know, hey, I couldn't see this area. You may need invasive inspection. Okay, I hope you've learned something along the way here. This particular inspection is not all inclusive, right? This isn't the typical crawl space. This is one of many crawl spaces. A crawl space can be challenging. I literally have performed hundreds of crawl space inspections. I'll tell you my top 3 issues I find. 1, mold. Microbial growth, mold, whatever you want to call it, is very prevalent in a crawl space without proper ventilation and without proper insulation, as well as a vapor barrier. It's crucial to keeping it healthy. Remember also that your home acts like a chimney. You breathe what's below you. If you live over a crawl space, that air is coming up into the house. Mold in a crawl space is more crucial than finding mold in an attic because you're breathing that air. 2, termite, carpenter ant, carpenter bee, or powder post or wood boring beetle damage, insect damage, typically found on a sill plate or a rim joist or band joist because of moisture intrusion. A lot of crawl spaces on the outside wall, you'll see folks put mulch year after year after year. That builds up, gets to the sill plate or the rim joist, that stays wet, and it's ideal for insects to infiltrate. 3, moisture intrusion and moisture damage. Whether that moisture is coming in through the bottom of the stem wall or coming through the top, through the rim joist, moisture damage, moisture intrusion is critical. You want to stop any moisture from getting into the crawl space. You want to help your home by getting moisture well away from the crawl space so that it stays healthy. Dry and good ventilation is what's going to keep your crawl space area healthy. If you notice moisture intrusion at the lower areas of a crawl space and there's pea gravel and a nice vapor barrier, that's not a serious concern as long as there's no standing water under that vapor barrier. If you notice moisture intrusion at the top where it's literally pouring in like a waterfall, then that is a concern that needs to be remedied. Make sure you pay attention. If it looks like a fish, smells like a fish, it's probably an issue in a crawl space. Make sure you pay attention to your crawl space. Make sure you get into every nook and cranny you possibly can so you don't miss anything. Crawl spaces are loaded with spots to write on your report for. That's 317-938-WIN1. I'd be happy to help you if you get stuck in any crawl space on any issue and you need some clarification. Thanks. Good luck.
Thank you for listening. If you're looking for more information on crawl space inspection or other parts of a home, check out our other episodes or navigate to WLS via the WIN intranet. We can't wait to help you succeed.